All right, CNT125, we are working on our virtualization cloud computing lab. So I got to the lab room, I downloaded a copy of that lab as a PDF file, and I have it here ready to go. That's going to be a handy tip for many labs we do. Oftentimes you're disconnecting your workstation patch cable from the internet connection, so at that point you don't have any ability to get your files. So it's usually a good idea to download it ahead of time so you have it, or have it on a laptop that you have at your lab station you can use as well. One of those two will work well for you. So I've downloaded, and this lab, the first part of the lab, we're going to work on virtualization. We're going to create a virtual machine and work with it. The second part of the lab, we're going to do some cloud computing stuff with Amazon Web Services. This podcast, we're going to be looking at the first part on virtualization. So what we're going to do is we're going to launch the hypervisor that we have on our desktop. The hypervisor we have is the VMware Workstation. And we're going to create a new virtual machine from a Linux ISO that we have downloaded for you already. If you go to the, let me go to the C drive here. We'll go to C drive here. In there we have a folder called CNT Apps. In that we actually have Linux Mint 22 downloaded and ready to use to build a virtual machine. So what we're going to do is over here, let me get our directions handy again. We're in our hypervisor, we're going to do File, New Virtual Machine. So File, New Virtual Machine. We're going to do the typical. It's going to ask us some questions, but not too many. We're going to do the installer image. We're going to build this off of that Linux Mint ISO. Here's our C drive, CNT Apps folder. There's the Linux Mint ISO. We're going to say Open. We're going to continue. It's going to say, what is it? It is a Linux distro. Ubuntu 64-bit is fine, or you can always pick the option for other Linux 6X or later kernel 64-bit. But we'll use the Ubuntu 64. That's good. We're going to give this virtual machine a name. Okay, make sure you include CNT125 and make sure you include your name. In this case, I'm going to do Brown, and I'm going to call it Linux Mint. Okay, make sure you use your name. That way you know it's your virtual machine, and other people know it's yours and can leave it alone, and vice versa. So I'm including Brown. You include your name. You can do first or last, whatever you need to identify your virtual machine. We're going to leave that folder location alone. We'll do next. It's giving a minimum disk size. We're going to give it just a little bit more so we have room to store some files on, and we're going to select the option to store virtual disk as a single file. We'll do next, and we don't want to create it yet. We actually want to customize the hardware a little bit. So we're going to click Customize Hardware, and we're going to select these options here that I have listed in the lab. From memory, we're going to give it just a little bit more. I'm going to go to 4 gig, so it has a little bit more processing. It's able to process. If I pick too much, it robs it away from my host machine. So I don't want to do too much, but I don't want to do the bare minimum because it usually runs pretty slow if I do. Under network adapter, we're not going to use NAT. We're going to be bridged mode. That way it acts like a node on my network, not shielded behind this host PC, but actually it looks like it's connected to the network like a separate machine. We're going to say close, and now we'll say finish. Now it's created, but we need to actually launch it and install the OS. So I'm now going to pick that option. You notice there's a couple over here we could pick. We're going to make sure we pick ours, and we're going to power on this virtual machine. Now this will take a minute or two for it to boot. We're just going to let it select all the default options, if you will. We're just going to start Linux Mint. That's fine. We can either hit the enter key or let it time out and boot. And I'm going to scroll down here to the next page. This is actually starting it up. Once it comes up, we'll need to do, we'll let it boot, and then we'll actually need to do the install. Well, while it's booting, I'm going to pause the recording. When it's done booting, I'll come right back. All right, and we're back. That was about maybe a minute that it finished booting. Here is my desktop now. What we're going to do is we're going to actually install it, just like we would be installing this OS onto a new machine. So we're going to come up here and double-click the Install Linux Mint option. And we're going to go through the install process to actually put this OS into this little slot we created with the hypervisor, if you will. So we'll need to go through a series of options, and once it finally starts doing the install, again, I'm going to pause because that maybe will be about 5-10 minutes for it to do the install, and then we'll come back on our podcast. Okay, you can do it. You can do it. Quick pause there while it loaded. All right, we're going to select our English for our install. Continue. Language for keyboard and everything. Continue. We'll install the multimedia codecs. We'll do continue. And I'm just working my way down through the items I have listed here for you. That's all we're doing. Now this is going to, in the spot we created for the hypervisor, this is going to erase that little piece and install it. That is fine. We're going to do install now. It's going to do one more verify of like, hey, is it okay if I create these little pieces that we need for the install? Sure. We're going to do continue. We need to plug a few more settings in. We'll select our location. So, Eastern time zone, if you will. And now we're going to create basically a name. So I'm going to use up here something like CNT125. I'm going to do brown again, and use this computer name now. That way you know it's your machine. Use that for the username. Leave that alone. And for password, please use either CNT class or password. The reason I say that is if you don't use this for a week or two and come back, you might be like, what's the password? I know it's generic, but at least we can help you get in and you won't be stuck. So I'm using CNT class. And I'm going to do log on automatically. Okay, that way I know it's the less secure option, but for us working in the lab room, this would be the most handy. We're going to do continue. It's going to start the install. This is going to take maybe 10 minutes or so. Again, I'm going to pause the recording while it's happening. All right, and the install is done. Maybe 10-15 minutes or so it took. I was doing some other work while that was going on. You probably can do the same thing too. We're going to do a restart now on this guy. It's probably going to pop up a message saying, hey, make sure your install media is removed, then hit the enter key. This is kind of like the days of when you had a CD or DVD that you put in, and after the install you had to pop it out before rebooting the machine. So make sure you hit the enter at this point, let it reboot. When it comes up, we'll work with it. Again, I'm going to pause while it's rebooting. Alright, it's done rebooting. This is a little welcome message. I'm going to click this little box because I don't want to continue seeing that. The other thing I'm going to do is down here in my hypervisor it says, after I installed, I finished installing. Then that way we're good to go. Here's my desktop. Here is my basically my start button, if you will, or Windows button, if you will. This has access to all. This is your access to all the applications, utilities on this OS. Feel free to use and explore and so forth. We have a couple tasks I want you to do once this is up and running. We want to look at our network settings and work with our network settings and work with our VNIC settings on the hypervisor. So on the bottom bar, we're going to go to network settings and we're going to look at, so down here on the bottom bar, we're going to look at the network settings and we're going to see what it is set as. Okay, here's my wired NIC. I'm going to open the settings on this and go to IP4, and we're set for DHCP. So it is getting an IP address from DHCP from somewhere. I'm going to go back out here to, actually I'll close this out. This is the IP your machine is getting, 192.168.10.105 via DHCP. The other way I could get to this is through here, and I go to preferences and scroll down to network settings here, and I actually get to the same utility. Now I have two of the same utility open. Well, that's the other way to get to it. Okay. Now, we're not going to make any changes at this point, but we will now want to look at the IP address that the virtual machine is using and the IP address that our host machine, the Windows machine, is using. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the command prompt down here, the terminal on my Linux machine, and do an ifconfig and see what are we getting. We're getting 192.168.10.105. I'm going to go out here to the Windows desktop and I'm going to open its command prompt. It's on the bottom menu bar, or I could click the Windows icon and start typing command prompt. And there it is. It'll come up that way, one of the two ways. And we're going to do an IP config on this guy. In this one, under my Ethernet 3, that's the NIC we're using, Ethernet 3, we see a 10.87, 192.168.10.87. Over here we see a 192.168.10.105. So these are both on the same network, but they have their own unique IP. That is because we selected bridged mode. Okay, that's making this virtual machine look like it's another node on the same network. That's what we should be seeing at this point. Okay, and that's what I want you to see here. We're going to issue a ping between the two to test, are these actually nodes that we can reach on a network, if you will. So I'm going to ping 10.105. For my Windows machine, I'm going to ping 10.105. That's the Linux address. It is getting successful communication over to the Linux IP. I'm going to turn around from the Linux IP and ping the Windows IP, 10.87. So we're going to ping, and I might need to use the numlock key, 192.168.10.87. Yeah, 10.87. And we're going to test a way of connectivity there, and we do. So we have connectivity from the Linux machine back to the Windows machine. Now you noticed over here we'll need to use the Control-C to break our ping. It'll continually ping if I don't stop that ping sequence. Okay? Now, before we go any further, let's make sure we install some utilities we might need down the road. So we're going to install traceroute and MTR on the Linux machine since we have our command prompt open. So we're going to do sudo apt install, and we'll do traceroute. It's going to ask us for the password. CNT class was what I set. It's going to go out and get the package, bring it back and install it for us. So that one's done, and I'm going to do sudo apt install MTR. That's my trace route. It's going to want a confirmation. We need a capital Y there as a yes to confirm that. And now that is installed. That package is installed that we might need in the future. The other way to go is there is a software manager. We can go through the GUI if we wish. All right. Now, on this podcast, I believe we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to pause here. The next podcast, we're going to start working with the VNIC settings on our hypervisor.